Okay, good morning everyone. I have started the recording and we have Kaijan with us this morning as our masterclass presenter for us today. And let me just tell you a little bit about Kaijan and how fortunate we are to have him with us. So Kaijan was featured on the front page of Intrapreneur magazine in issue 5, and he has a remarkable career. So he hails from Connecticut in the US. He's a speaker, he's a best-selling author, he's a growth strategist and a globally recognized and celebrated innovation thought leader. Now, Kaijan has been hailed by the prestigious Thinkers 50 Radar Group as among the top 30 management thinkers globally and in the top most influential innovation thought leaders in the world, and the #1 global business strategist in terms of being a thought leader in this field, which incidentally was what he did his doctorate in. So he shares his leading edge thinking with business faculties all across the US and internationally, and sits on a number of various advisory boards with his remarkable body of knowledge. Now, he began his career at McKinsey & Co. before founding his company called Outthinker, which is a consulting firm dedicated to helping organizations thrive in this agile, digital, purpose-driven world that we find ourselves in. And in this capacity, he works right across all the sectors, from large Fortune 500 companies through to higher education institutions, through to technology companies. So he's got a remarkable breadth of experience. Now, he is the author of 5 books, with the most recent, which is called Driving Innovation from Within, a guide for internal entrepreneurs, being nominated for the prestigious Edison Award. That's an award which honors excellence in innovation and of course is named after the famous innovator and inventor Thomas Edison. And this was the book that put Kaijan on my radar because internal entrepreneurs are, of course, as we know, intrapreneurs. And that's what we're all about here at the Global Entrepreneurs Institute. So we are incredibly fortunate to have Kaijan join us for this month's Global Entrepreneurs Institute Members Masterclass. And Kaijan, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and giving us your time. This evening is, in your case, in the morning here in Brisbane. The way we'll do this is that I will throw to you for 30 or 40 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A where our members can interact with you and ask you questions directly. I will keep an eye on the chat box that will be going along the side, and I just encourage our participants to make a note of the particular questions that you'd like to ask Kaijan about. So we are going to get started, and at this point we've got a number of other people who've joined us. Welcome aboard. Kaijan, would you like to take it away and share your screen, and we'll get started. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here. I look forward to learning myself. I don't know that I have all the answers, and it's great to be among a group of entrepreneurs and to just dialogue with you. I'll just give you a little context of my work, and then the impetus for my most recent book, and then we'll kind of do a choose your own adventure where we'll choose which elements of that book we want to dig into. I'm also going to give you a copy of this presentation. I'm going to give you a workbook and free access to an online course that I built on the book. So let's talk. So my interest really and my doctorate work was in looking at strategic language as tools that help us solve problems. If we look at strategy in that way, we see that there's no one right answer for what strategy is. It really is a flow of terms or concepts that are introduced in language, and some are adopted and some are rejected, some replace what's there, some fit in what's there. But if we look at it, I won't go through this whole thing, but strategy comes from the word stratego, which in ancient Greece was the name not for a general, but was the name for an elected official who's responsible for rallying resources to defend or attack, which is something very much at the heart, excuse me, of what entrepreneurs do. It becomes sort of famous with the art of war, and really it comes into business in the 1920s when strategy is really about managing business cycles, which eventually becomes long-range planning. It borrows from game theory and politics, and so we start looking at strategy as about a game against your competitors. That leads to this idea of co-opetition. Peter Drucker says strategy is really the answer to the question, what business are you in? That kind of then leads to goal setting. And the whole idea of that strategy is dependent on internal and external things. Doesn't really introduce until the 1960s, which then gives us naturally the SWOT. Strategy as design comes next. And, I could keep going, but I think it's pretty neat that the term competitive advantage isn't introduced until 1985. And so we're not even talking about competitive advantages until, the last few decades. So how do you get competitive advantage is economies of scale, economies of scope, a resource-based view. It's about being different. It's about culture. And where we're really landing in now, I think, is that strategy is about people. And so my book has really, my prior book was really about how do you activate innovative thinking in yourself and your team. And I was doing a lot of work applying that methodology, which is sort of embedded in my new book. But I found that often those ideas, when they are conceived of inside a company, they often don't make it out of the company. So for the last 7 years, I've been focused on driving innovation from within, which is sort of how do those ideas get into and out of through the organization. So what I'm really interested in is how do ideas come from new language? And usually the new strategy, the new innovation is accompanied by or opened up by a new term. For example, in 1968 or before 1968, the where people jumped over high bars was always forward, and then Dick Fosbury goes over backward. Now, it isn't until we have the term Fosbury flop that we start going over the high bar backward. And so I like to look at language again as a set of tools that helps us deal with change. And we know that we are undergoing a lot of change, right? In every industry, we see these kinds of trends underway: tech substitutes, digital transformation, cybersecurity, blockchain, AI, big data, P2P platforms, distrust of big brands, Internet of Things. And with COVID, of course, all of this is being accelerated. And so really the question is, do we want to keep playing the way we have played, or do we want to play differently? Do we want to be a thinker or outthinker? So that was really what my first my first piece of work was about, is how to think differently. But I found that when you develop ideas inside a company, often what comes up is this idea that, hey, we can't do it inside because it's really the entrepreneur that are the innovators, whereas large companies are the ones who take those innovations and then scale them. And if we look down any list of most innovative business people, these are the names that we keep seeing over and over again. And what do you notice about them? They're all, Irene, I can't hear you. What do you notice?
Well, number one, they're all men.
Yes, they're all men. Yes, they're all men. They're all white. They all quit college or left soon after college. They all took a long journey across the country to the United States. In the case of Elon Musk, across an ocean. They go to the West Coast. They put together a small team. You've got a hipster, a hacker, a hustler, and they step into the proverbial cave where they build their innovation and then they unleash it on the world.
Yeah. They all start in garages. That's like
They all start
that's
in
a
yes.
mandatory requirement of being a global entrepreneur. You've got to start in
Yes.
a garage.
Yes. 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 And it's remarkably consistent how often the garage plays a role, how often that narrative is repeated. So this continues the idea. It's really the stickiness of this story, not the truth of this story. It is a story we like to tell, but it propagates the idea that people like us are not the innovators, that the entrepreneurs are the innovators, which is why there are so many more books on entrepreneurship than intrapreneurship. There's so many more programs on entrepreneurship in colleges than in intrapreneurship. And I started getting interested in the question of whether this is really the truth when I met Jean Faywall. She is an intrapreneur. I didn't use the term at that time. She works at a publishing house called Macmillan, and I did a project with her and her team. We did an ideation session, and I thought, as usual, they would have fun in discussing an idea, but they wouldn't actually move on this idea. Lo and behold, 3 years later, I'm listening to the radio, the public radio station here, and I hear a story about this great innovation that Macmillan has introduced. And I recognized it had a different name, but I recognized that it was the idea that Jean had. So I called her up and I said, can I come over and talk to you about how you did it? And what I learned was really remarkable. And I interviewed 150 internal innovators like Jean. And what I found is the character of the entrepreneur is very different than the character of an entrepreneur. And when I went to ask the question, is she a fluke? Is she an exception? I actually found that no, employees innovating is actually more the rule than the exception. I looked at the 30 most transformative innovations over the last 30 years. These are the big innovations of the internet, email, DNA sequencing, mobile phones, and I said, who conceived of it, who developed it, and then who scaled it? And what I found was that 70% of these big innovations were conceived of not by entrepreneurs, not in a garage, not by white men who quit college. They were conceived of by employees. And so let's think about that. If it were actually true that entrepreneurs are the innovators and employees are not, that this morning you would not have had a mobile phone to reach for. You would not have been able to connect that to the internet. You would not have been able to send an email. If you got sick, you couldn't get a stent. You couldn't get an MRI. We would live in a dramatically inferior world if it weren't for the possibility of employees to innovate. In fact, if we have to say, based off of the data, employees are the primary innovator in society, not entrepreneurs. Now, naturally, we need both, right? But if we persist with the story of the hero's journey of the entrepreneur, I think what we put at risk is we're communicating to other colleagues and our kids, if you want to innovate, you need to be an entrepreneur. And we could potentially lose out on whatever the next internet is. So I started studying this, right? And what I found is that levels of entrepreneurship actually go up with scale, but they go up for different reasons than we think. So you start with a high level of agility when you are a startup, a disruptor, you're risk-taking. And then the entrepreneur comes upon the secret formula, the business model that works and is profitable and growing. And naturally, they want to repeat the business model, repeat what works. So they introduce bureaucracy, they narrow tasks, they tightly monitor the performance of those tasks, they become risk averse. But if the scale continues, it becomes possible to increase entrepreneurship again for 4 reasons. First, inside a large company, you have more scale than an entrepreneur does, so that when you introduce an innovation, you can get it out to more markets across more channels through a larger sales force. In fact, many of the entrepreneurs that I interviewed, what they say is they love doing it inside because of that scale, that otherwise that would be a tough to create. you have multiple capabilities inside your house, right? If you want to get on the phone with a marketing expert, hey, you can call your marketing expert. If you want to know what the regulation is on distributing into a new territory, hey, you can call your legal department. And so you have these multiple capabilities that entrepreneurs often have difficulty tapping. We have what, excuse me, what academics call slack resources, which is just you have excess resources to invest. And you have the ability to absorb and diversify risk. So Jeff Bezos said, if you have a 1 in 10 chance of 100 times payoff, you've got to take that bet every time, but you want to be ready to lose 9 times out of 10. So we actually have the ability to take 10 bets when the entrepreneur can only take 1 bet and effectively ensure a 10x return versus a 90% chance of failure, right? So you innovate, but you innovate differently. So I'd like to hear from you. Maybe you can put into the chat. I was going to do this. Sorry, I was going to use this this tool, but let's just do chat. What would you say is the number one or one of the top barriers that make it difficult to innovate from within? Because I asked this question of these 150 entrepreneurs, and I said, what stops you? And I collected all their answers, and I bucketed them. So that's what I was going to show you. Culture, leadership support, corporate inertia, leaders not on board, career managers focused on retirement, acknowledgement that ideas can come from within. Yes. Great. So let me show you what I found. All of these are things that I heard. Again, I took these 100, I kind of put it into an Excel and grouped them. And I found that there are these 7 that are repeated a lot. And just to make it easy to remember, I put it into a framework, innovate. I believe all models are wrong, but some are useful. I forget which philosopher said that. So I'm not saying this is the truth, but it's just a way to help us remember where we are in the journey and what comes next. So intent is really about activating the intent to innovate that many employees have just simply given up. Maybe they've been told no too many times. And there are 3 internal beliefs that rob people, us and our coworkers, of the intent to innovate. If we do activate that intent, we light that fire, then we come across need. Often employees don't understand what the market and, importantly, the organization need. So you'll hear a CEO say, I ask my people for ideas, but they don't come up with very good ideas. And often that's because they don't understand what the strategy is. Less than 55% of mid-level managers can name even 2 of their company's top strategic priorities. So if they don't understand the strategy, of course they're going to be innovating in the wrong spaces. Options is that if we get attracted to an idea and we get fixated on it, instead of generating and managing a whole portfolio of ideas, of options, there's nothing more dangerous than an idea when it's the only one you have. Value blockers is really business model conflict. I wanted to have it spell something, so I changed it to a V, so it will fit into innovate. But you could think of it as business model conflict, that the business model that you would naturally put around an idea conflicts with the current business model. And there are ways around that through business model design and training people in business model design so they can alter the idea a little bit, re-engineer it a little bit to reduce the chances of that idea of getting rejected. ACT is really about agile and that innovative ideas often need to be, you need to take action on them in order to prove the idea, while established organizations are geared towards asking you to prove the idea before you can take action on it. And that creates this catch-22 that catches up and blocks a lot of ideas. The next is team, is that the right group of people who are working on this idea is a cross-functional team, small, agile. You need someone from marketing, you need someone from operations, someone from finance, someone from logistics, and those people don't all report to the same person. So unless you can get the CEO to give permission for these people to work together, they don't get to work together, and that's where the silos come in. And then there are a bunch of challenges under environment. That's where culture comes in. That's where organizational structures come in. That's where leadership comes in. That's where talent comes in. And so I kind of put those all under environment. So what I find is by making someone aware of these steps, when they reach a barrier, it's not a sign that they're on the wrong path. It is a sign they are on the right path. They're like, okay, after I do options, I know I'm going to hit value blockers. So when that happens, I know that I'm on the path, not that something's wrong. And it also helps you as a leader assess what you need to unlock in order to activate greater forms of innovation. So let me do a quick poll. I'd like to know if we were to discuss just some of these. Sorry, where am I? Here we go. If we were to discuss just some of these, which ones would you want to discuss? And I'd like you to go to the website at the top, menti.com. You can do that on your phone, your tablet, your computer, any connected device. And which barrier would you most value addressing today? So you can just go to menti.com. I'm going to do it as well, just to make sure that it's working properly. Good. Yeah, I think I let you pick either 2 or 3, maybe. Okay, so why don't we focus on ACT and environment. I ran, when COVID hit, we organized a set of charity summits, and we had some quite remarkable speakers, everyone from like Scott Anthony, Whitney Johnson, Rita McGrath, Renee Mauburn. Those are kind of the people that are talking about innovation. So that's why I mentioned those. And so what I'll share is things that aren't necessarily new, but I kind of put them together and organize them. So let's talk first about ACT. And you may already be familiar with the idea of agile experimentation, right? But that's what it's really about. I'm sorry, let me find the spot here. Yeah, okay. So, actually, let me go back and just show something first. So George Day is a professor at Wharton, and he conducted a really exhaustive and interesting study in 2007, where he measured the success rate, failure rates actually, of different innovations. And he put them on this 2x2 grid. You're probably familiar with that, is how close is this product or technology to what we currently sell, is on the y-axis, and how close is what the intended market, who we sell it to, And so you have the selling the same thing, something similar to what we're selling now, to the same customers, which is in the bottom left quadrant. That's the least risky. The further out we go, if it's to entirely new customer and entirely new kind of product or service, there's a high failure rate. So what you can see here is that you can expect, if you're doing completely new things, a 75 to 95% failure rate. And what that introduces is the dilemma that if we have large investments, we're unlikely to want to invest them out there. So what you want to do is you want to make smaller investments so that you can handle the high failure rate that you're likely to experience as you move further out along this curve, which is why taking action inexpensively is so important. And I already referred to this, that companies, established organizations tend to adopt a prove, plan, execute model. Prove it. Give me a business plan, and then I'll give you funding, and you'll execute it. Whereas in those higher risk areas, more innovative approaches, what is usually requires more of an act, learn, build approach, which is the data does not exist to tell me whether this is a good idea or not. You can't. I think it's the CEO of Netflix, I believe it is. Or was it Reid Hoffman? I think it's Reid Hoffman, LinkedIn. He said, you can't run a financial projection on how someone will react to a product if no customers ever reacted to that product. The data doesn't exist. You can look all you want, but the data doesn't exist. Instead, we need to take action. And people think of this as kind of a novel Silicon Valley approach, but it's actually been the way innovation has been underway for a long time. When Lee Iacocca was the CEO of Chrysler, people came to him with an idea that we could release a convertible version of one of their brand of cars, the Sebring, and they were going to invest a lot of money in doing focus groups and in doing market research to test what the market size would be. And he said, well, wait, before you do that, why don't you simply cut the roof off of a car and drive it around and see how people will respond? Same thing that Apple did when it borrowed the technology for the mouse from Xerox. It was actually based off of the lasers, which would have been too expensive for a consumer product. So what did they do? They wanted to first inexpensively test how people would react to having a trackball. That was their idea. So they went to the pharmacy and they bought one of those roller deodorant sticks and put that into a box, and they let people play around with it. HP, when it came up with the first electronic calculator, it hired a marketing firm, and the marketing firm, looking at the existing data, said, shelve this product. There is no market for an electric calculator because there is already an entrenched competitor that people have already adopted that has a radically lower cost price point than you. That competitor being, of course, the slide rule. So instead of putting it away, they said, well, let's just build 1,000 of them and put them out and see what happens. And before they know it, they're selling 1,000 a day. So the point here is that you need to convince your company to let you conduct an inexpensive experiment in order to get the data to test whether this is a good idea. Anyway, I've got too many stories here, but the idea here is that we are maximizing ROI, not by putting a financial projection that increases our R, but by minimizing our I. Many of our clients like this idea by Michael Schrage. He wrote the Innovators Hypothesis. Highly recommend it. He has this idea of a 5-5-5 experiment. Give 5 people $5,000, 5 weeks, and let them run an experiment and see what we learn. So in the workbook, there's a way to design an experiment, but if you're an entrepreneur, you probably you may know of another model. I'm not a stickler to any particular model, but I looked at all kind of many models on hypothesis-driven testing and kind of put them together in some key steps. I think I'll kind of close my presentation, if you will, on environment. Excuse me. And then, we can jump around into other sections, if that's where the conversation goes. So In an environment, people often, people get really frustrated, obviously, right? Like Western Union, when it was offered the right to purchase Alexander Graham Bell's telephone, they declined, and they said, this telephone has too many shortcomings to be seriously considered as a means of communication. The device is inherently of no value to us. Walt Disney was fired from a newspaper for lacking creativity. Decca Records have rejected the Beatles, telling their manager that guitar groups are on their way out and we don't like your boys' sound. We already talked about, we didn't mention that, Steve Wozniak, he proposed the technology that became the Apple computer 5 times when he was an employee at HP, and he was rejected all 5 times. So this rejection happens, and it's frustrating. But a good trick is, instead of trying to change the entire company, which you can do if you are the CEO or if you have the CEO on board, as an entrepreneur, we may not have that power. And that is a long, that's a long mountain to roll the stone up, right? Is to change the whole company. Better approach might be to find an island of freedom. Elliot Berman did this. So he was an engineer and inventor, and he arguably had engineered the biggest leap in improved performance of solar cells in the history of solar energy, when he cut the cost per kilowatt hour by 90%. He brings it to his employer, and his employer doesn't like this idea. Why? Because his employer is Exxon. And Exxon doesn't support any innovation that might cannibalize their core business, right? But Elliot was very clever. And he said, I am not going to try to pitch this into the product people. I'm going to find a use for this inside Exxon. And the use that he found, this is an important distinction, is successful internal innovators appear to think of their employer as a customer. And so they look for the customer need. And his customer need was on oil platforms, offshore oil platforms, where they had an energy problem. They couldn't get enough energy to kind of keep the lights going sometimes, or they went through great expense to power these things. And he said, I've got the solution. This is not a product idea. This is an internal solution to a cost problem. And because of that, he got Exxon's support to hire a team and continue his work. Eventually, it spins out. So what we're looking for is an island of freedom. And where do you find this island of freedom? What I did was I scoured through every piece of research I could find that showed a statistically significant correlation between some organizational factor and higher or lower levels of internal innovation. And there's a lot of stuff that we believe is true, but as isn't supported. And there's some stuff that's supported that you wouldn't think of. So some of this will be like, obvious, and some of it maybe will look counterintuitive. But I bucket them into talent, structure, culture, and leadership. And the reason I have these lines in between them is because they codepend on each other. It's an interconnected system, which makes it kind of a wicked problem that's hard to untangle. I saw someone say leadership. Yeah, I do find it often starts with leader. The leaders, what they can do is they can build the right kind of talent, they can put in the right structures, and they can build the right culture. Well, what's the right kind of talent? I think this is interesting. When we look for internal innovators, we often look for people that look like entrepreneurs. But there are 6 attributes that are shown to be common among effective internal innovators. 3 of them make them look like entrepreneurs, and 3 of them make them look very different. The 3 that make them look very similar is that they're innovative thinkers. They take autonomous action, they act without asking for permission, and they have strong market awareness. That's awareness of the customer, awareness of the competitor. So this is kind of obvious, but where they diverge from the typical character of an entrepreneur is that they are not risk-seeking. In fact, they enjoy creating risk asymmetry, a situation where you bet a little in order to get a lot. They're not betting their money, they're betting the company's money. They're almost like an investor, like a George Soros, right? They engineer a situation where we can lose little, but we can gain a lot, and then they push hard into that. They have an intrinsic motivation to innovate. many people I talked to, they introduced innovations and they weren't even recognized for them ultimately. But they get a kick out of making change happen. They aren't billionaires. They don't make a lot of money, more money necessarily in doing this. Some people get frustrated and say, I came with this innovation. If I were an entrepreneur, I'd be a billionaire. But they forget that they didn't have to eat ramen noodles. They didn't have to put their children's finances at risk. So that you want to have that intrinsic motivation. And then political acumen. This is one of a pretty deep study that showed that the key distinguisher between successful and frustrated internal innovators is that the successful ones view the political challenge as part of the problem-solving process. So it's not only, oh, I put up with it. It is, I love it. I love the game, the 3D chess game of thinking through managing the politics. On structure, you've got innovation resources. Can you get 5 people, $5,000 in 5 weeks? Rewards that encourage and celebrate innovating. Also that allow for risk-taking. Does someone fail and do they get a pat on the back and a congratulations for what you learned? Or does that damage their career trajectory? That is a great way to signal to future innovators that we do or don't want you to innovate. And do you have organizational freedom? Can you put together that cross-functional team? The cultural norms, it's interesting. They basically tie to 4 of the key talent things. But if you look at highly innovative companies, you see these 4 mentioned in their as their cultural norms. And let me show you. I'm going to stop with one slide here that I think might be interesting for you. So I wanted to see. I think innovation is. It's a little bit of, you say tomato, I say tomato. So we have different definitions of innovation, but I think a good definition or requirement of innovation is that it's got to be new and people have to look at it and say, hey, this is different. But it also has to be adopted, because if you innovate and it's not adopted, it's not innovation, it's creativity. Steve Jobs says, innovation is creativity that ships. In other words, it sells. And the third thing has got to be valuable. Got to be value to the company, value to the market, value to the consumer. And so if we take that as innovation, what would have to be true is that a company can only be innovative if they're recognized as innovative and they are outperforming their competitors. And so anyway, I went through this list of 300 odd companies that have appeared on most innovative lists, and I found only these companies actually outperform their competition. And if we look at how they innovate, they really adopt a people-driven model. They don't isolate innovation. They don't lock it up in an innovation lab. They don't tell some people you can innovate and others you can't. With just a few exceptions, the pharmaceutical exceptions, they really take a bottom-up, people-driven approach to innovation. Anyway, I want to leave time for dialogue because I also am eager to learn from you and hear what you've experienced. So any comments or reactions or questions or suggestions or examples?
Okay. Well, Kaijan, you've blown my mind. That's just been absolutely phenomenal. I cannot believe, the value just in literally 35 minutes or so. Thank you so much for sharing that amazing presentation with so much wisdom and expertise. And I absolutely love so many of your key comments. And while I'm speaking, could people start to type some things into the chat box that they'd like to ask Kaijan, and then I'll unmute you and you can ask your question. But for me, I just wanted to say that a couple of things first. Number one, this whole shift onto people is what this global entrepreneurialism movement is about. Because for a long time, we've talked about strategy, and that's important. We've talked about market, we've talked about products. But ultimately, innovation is inert if it's only written into a strategy document, or if it's something that people, discuss at their retreats once a year, because it's the people who drive it. So it's the people who make strategy come alive, and people who make change happen. And so I love the fact that you've foregrounded that shift from talking about strategy to people. Number one, that's really important, and it's the intrapreneurs who are the people who drive it. So wonderful there. But for me, what's been a really major takeaway is to shift the way we talk about the barriers internally within organizations, because one of the things that come up all the time for me when I'm working with entrepreneurs, often within government departments, is that they come up against a bureaucracy. They have to deal with what we refer to as, I'm sure you know, the the corporate immune system. And so what they're talking about is that they are seeing the political navigation of the organization in order to get their entrepreneurial initiatives through to be very difficult. And I want to reframe that from here on. Anytime someone talks to me about how difficult it is to navigate the internal politics, I'm going to say, well, that's one of the characteristics of an entrepreneur. They love the cut and thrust of the internal politics. That's one of the keys to being a successful entrepreneur. It's being able to understand what the internal politics means, how it's going to impact you. And number one, you need to learn how to navigate it and thrive on that learning rather than feel deflated and defeated by it. So that's great. Thank you very much.
Great. And that's one reason you see so many entrepreneurs, when their company is acquired by a larger company, they leave as soon as they can, because they get frustrated by that, by the effort of the politics.
Yes.
One guy that I interviewed, he said it's like lining up cannons. It takes a long time for us to line up our cannons, but when they go off simultaneously, go off with a big bang.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, I'm just looking at people's questions here. Paul has a question, so I'm going to unmute him. Okay, Paul, you're unmuted. You just need to unmute from your end. Just a sec.
Okay, there we go. Look, thanks, Sarina. Thanks, Kaijan. That was I probably got 1,000 questions, but that was really insightful.
I can probably answer one of those then. If you give them all to me, I'll find one I can answer maybe.
Yeah, just one observation first. I think a lot of organisations, they tend to see people in functional roles rather than as creative, kind of intrinsically motivated people as well. And I think that's a real challenge. I think Art Fry was quite once at 3M saying that we hire and then we treat them like sheep or something. And I think there's something about that, the number of people that we get. So it's just an observation I've seen.
Yes,
the question I really had, it was also just asking for your observation of, you're looking, there was a great couple of slides in there, they're all great, but there was a couple of great slides in there around where innovation was, where ideas were conceived and how they flowed through. And then you talked about the agility curve and then further innovation down the track. One of the things I've observed through my career has been that a lot of research and development happens in large institutions which struggle with agility. And then at the point when they actually need that large organization, resources, capability, financial capability, they spin them out. What I often see is that you see kind of lumbering research and development projects in universities or research institutions, and then at the point when they really could do with a large, diverse, capable organization with resources, they spin them out and then they die. And it seems to me, I wonder whether that you've seen any examples where they've actually spun out the entity to do research in an agile way, in a bit of the island that you talked about, the island of innovation or something, and then draw them back in when they actually need the resources to scale.
I know stories of it happening kind of accidentally, where someone leaves and starts something, and then it gets sold back into the company, you know. But I don't know. I hear companies talk about it as part of their deal strategy as one form, you know, spin out, acquire, build out, and then incorporate in, build, and then we can decide later if it should sit inside or outside. But I don't have an example. I don't know of one. But it's interesting. I thought that spinning out maybe is you're doing it exactly the wrong time, at the time when the entity wants scale is exactly when you want to keep it in. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Thanks, Kaijan.
Go on, keep going, Paul. Did you want to
No, that's fine. I'll leave it to other people. I'm sure other people have got other questions, but
okay.
thank you very much, Kaijan. It's cool.
Okay. So who else would like to engage with Kaijan with some of that? I mean, my brain is just going at 1,000,000 miles an hour right now.
I can jump around it.
I could make, but yeah. Who else would like to ask Kaijan a question?
Irina, I have a question.
Yes, Malini, go.
Hello, Kaijan.
Hi.
Thank you so much for your presentation.
Thank you.
The distinctive feeling that I had, you know, as you went through slide after slide was just, I wanted to jump up and down and shout, yay, yay. I just saw so much. It was like a mirror that you were playing back. And I'm a serial entrepreneur. Whether other people see me that way or not, I know I am. You know, there's that, and I really loved how you picked out some of our key characteristics. I have noticed in my experience, you know, there are multiple ways of looking at the context within which entrepreneurs operate. And you talked about entrepreneurs themselves, you know, the attitudes that we bring, you know, our mindset, you know, and our skills and so on. You also talked about the organization. I was wondering whether you have observed any discerning characteristics of leaders of these innovative outperformers. And the reason I asked that question is that I have observed, you know, upon reflection, that there are certain types of people, like when they are in you know, in my line management or in leadership positions in my organizations, I tend to actually thrive. And in other places, I might be doing the same sort of thing, and the organization largely conforms to the same mission statements, value, and all that sort of values and purpose and so on. But that leadership is often that thing that is different and that doesn't support. And I would really like to know a little bit about your insights on that.
Yeah. I like Rita McGrath talks about this character of the Sherpa, and the internal innovator often finds this Sherpa. This person has been in the company for a long time, has a lot of political capital, and they get a kick out of helping you. You know, you mess up, and then they call and they, you know, where they fluff down feathers and they open doors for you. So finding that person is a critical step. This is just pulled. This is kind of synthesized from some academic research. It's not like new, but there is this idea of administrative leaders versus entrepreneurial leaders, and what are the key distinctions between them. And so under strategic orientation, we want to be and look for people that instead of driven by controlling resources, they're driven by perception of opportunity. We're looking for people, when they think about how they commit resources, it's not in a single stage with complete commitment out of a decision. It's in stages with minimal exposure at each stage. So they do that agile experimentation. Here's a little bit of money. Go learn something. Here's a little bit more. You're looking for people who prefer a management structure that's not hierarchical, but rather flat with multiple informal networks. You're looking for the basis on which you assign rewards, someone who assigns rewards not based on responsibility and seniority, but on value creation, right? That they really want to make this a what's the word I'm looking for? What's the word I'm looking for? I'm sorry. That it's a meritocracy, right? You're looking for people who don't seek safe, slow, steady growth, but are excited about rapid growth with an acceptance of acceptable risk. That risk orientation, it shouldn't be about risk being minimized. It should be about risk should be comparable to the payoff potential. And I think there's one more, yes. And the primary skill is not coordinating, but designing new organizational structures and processes. So this might be a checklist to think of the people that you have worked under that supported you and those who you felt less free in, and you can look for these things in them, you know.
That's
But
wonderful.
but they often don't look, you know, they don't wear ripped jeans, and they
Yeah.
don't drive their motorcycle to the office necessarily, and you know, they're hard to spot, which is why it was so hard for me to get these interviews, because you know.
You're absolutely right, Kaijan. And what I've been doing of late is, when I interview for a new job,
Mm-hmm.
And then they get towards the end of the interview and they ask me as the candidate, did you have any questions for us? I actually try and ask some questions about their leadership style to
Mm-hmm.
try and, discern the characteristics that matter to me.
Yes.
And I love your slide here because that will absolutely inform the questions I ask when I
Great.
go on to my next job. Thank you.
Great.
Lovely. Thanks, Malini. We have a question from Dr. Mark Glazebrook. So, Mark, I have already unmuted you. Would you like to jump in and ask your question?
Sure. Thanks, Irina, and thanks, Kaijan, for a very thought-provoking presentation. It might be an unfair question, but I just wonder whether you get a read on the tone with your customers or organisations about. There's a lot of talk about the impact of COVID and business models and where it's all going to end up as an economy. Traditionally, organisations can be a bit conservative, when they're in crisis. They sort of stick to the knitting type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there's still going to be space for innovation and entrepreneurs in the sort of post-COVID world?
Yeah, I think so. I think maybe we went through a phase of just freezing to make sense of what's happening, but I think we went through a phase of, hey, we can hold on, it will come back. And I think we're entering a phase where people are realizing, even if it does come back, it's going to take a long time. And what we come back to is going to be very different. So I think there's going to be a real sense of, hey, we need to rethink our business models and products and services and redo our plans. I think that there's going to be a hunger for doing things differently. That's the sense I'm getting.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's interesting because there's often, those two responses in a crisis. One is, I actually wrote a blog about this a few weeks ago, which was, how are people approaching the whole notion of innovation right now in this currently COVID and then soon to be post-COVID world. And it's like, no, we can't think about innovation because we're in crisis. Everything's changed. We can't think about innovation right now. We've already got so much change on our plates. That's one way of approaching it. And then the other more forward-thinking organizations are saying everything's changed. We actually have to think of innovation right now. So it's literally the same conditions are evoking really quite two almost opposite sorts of responses depending on what the maturity of the organization is in relation to their innovation culture and their recognition of how they're going to navigate the future. I'm glad you asked that question, Mark, because it was actually going to be my question if no one asked it about, how has COVID transformed the way we think about going forward in relation to innovation? Has it suddenly made people leaders who would otherwise have been a little bit resistant to thinking about this as a pervasive condition that should really just bubble up from every layer and part of the organization? Or Is it causing people to shut down and go, no, we have to wait till we can ride this out before we come out the other end, and then we can start thinking about innovation. But your comment about, in the short term, organizations were kind of trying to make sense of it, whereas now they're ready to start looking forward. Is that other people's sense as well? What's happening inside your own organizations? What's happening inside the organizations where you are? Jane, what's happening inside your government department? I've thrown you under the bus there, Jane. You probably weren't expecting me to throw to you. And then
sorry, Arena, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, no, sorry about that. I've got a bit of on my computer, my mute and unmute button is very sticky.
Yeah.
And I'm never sure whether it's working.
I've thrown to Jane because I've known Jane for a long time, and she is another, like Marlene, an archetypal government intrapreneur, public sector intrapreneur of the highest order. So I'm interested in your thoughts there, Jane.
Thank you, Arena. Look, I think it's been really interesting across government. There are always great little pockets of innovation in government, and I think what's been lovely is there's been an opportunity to expand some of these. So people have gone, oh, wow, that group's been doing that for a while. We might ask them and we'll start doing some of the things they did. So I think some of those small groups that previously have been, oh, yes, that team's always doing odd things, where those teams are actually being embraced a little bit more. So that's been exciting to see, I think, a real uptake of some of the work that's being done previously. I also think what's been so heartening in government, as in every other agency, is people who have forever been those managers who manage by bums on seats, have been some of the first people saying, oh, look, this working from home is really working for us. So even though, working from home is not an innovation, in government, it's been a real break in practice. And I think what it has created is a mindset that is now more open to innovation. I'm seeing, multi-teams getting together. I'm seeing different ideas for how we might do things, which I wasn't seeing beforehand. I think people feel much more comfortable sitting at home in their own backyard or their own lounge room, throwing out ideas where they mightn't have actually in the office. And it's easier to be not intimidated by people when they're not physically sitting across from you. So for me, I think it has freed people up to share their opinions more freely. And I think we're seeing a lot more interesting ideas coming out.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. Kaijan, have you actually done any work within government in the US or in any other countries where you'd be in a position to make any comments about that?
No, I've done with government contractors like Lockheed Martin, but I haven't done significant work in government.
Okay, that's fine. Good. Thank you very much. Now, Mark has got would like to make a. Sorry, Mike, over to you. Let's unmute you. There you go.
Thanks, Arena. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Thank you very much. It's been a great class. But look, there were three things that I'm observing sort of post-COVID, or what I'm now calling the not-for-profit economy, is, I'm seeing, first of all, you're seeing the people who, as you indicated, are just going to ground. And in fact, I was talking to a very large customer of mine, a multinational, the other day, and their exact words were, we can't possibly think about planning Christmas dinner. We're trying to work out if we can pay for tonight's dinner first. Mm-hmm. But conversely, it seems to me that, people often worry about innovation because, it's too disruptive. And my answer to that is, well, you're now so disrupted. Now is the time for innovation. And in fact, the world has changed, and therefore you have no choice. Yes. And unless your business plan includes the term, become irrelevant within 12 months, then you need to do something, because you will become irrelevant
Yes.
very, very
Yes.
quickly. But my final point is this. I think that at the risk of putting too fine a point on it, as global leaders, as the leaders of this type of thing, it's beholding on us to talk gently to these people and try and let them see the light. We could walk away and pretend it wasn't happening. But, you know, at the risk of exaggerating, it's kind of like walking away from someone who's standing on the precipice of a bridge. You just don't do that. You talk kindly to them and try and let them see the light. And I think that's some of our roles. Sorry, go on, Kane.
I'm looking for a slide that I just created today that is, I think, relevant to what we're saying, but I don't know if I'm going to find it quickly enough. I agree. I think that different sectors are going to have different levels of urgency. Unfortunately, there's a correlation, I would say, between, here we go, is a correlation between how important it is for your company to innovate, or your organization to innovate, and a negative correlation with the amount of resources you have. So, you know, Brooks Brothers recently went bankrupt, and I had done some work inside Brooks Brothers, and I was shocked, you know, before, and I was shocked like that. Their margins are so low that people developed, you know, this group came up with a bunch of innovative ideas. At the end, the CEO kind of said, look, you know, we've got whatever 7% margins, and we're going to invest our money in this new point of sale system in our stores, and that's all we can afford to do, you know. And now they're bankrupt. But what I looked at is I looked at companies, like all industries, and I said, if you're a low margin company, you're in trouble. If you are highly profitable, you know, then that's great. And then you have your debt load, or how strong your balance sheet is. If you got a lot of money, then you are going okay. If you got high debt, then you're going to run out of, you know, like airlines are. They've got high debt, they've got low margins, and so their runway, so to speak, is very short. And so I call these people thrive, survive, perish, and struggle. And I could send you the Excel, but I basically just did the math here, and like, these are the companies, this is what you see. And, you know, you see the publishing and retail, all forms of retail, auto parts, food wholesale, restaurants and dining, transportation. They're all low margin, high debt businesses that are, you know, struggling. And the ones that are thriving are healthcare products, information services, oil and gas. And I think over here, these survive, the regional banks, investment and asset management companies, software companies, you know, they are profitable enough that they can make it through. And a good way to think about it, I think, is that is two questions. One is it going to be a long recovery or a short recovery? And what we return to, we're going to return to normal, or are we going to return to something very different? And if you do that, if your company exists in the bottom two, it's a great moment to innovate, right? Because you can either be protecting, short recovery, we're going to return, just batten down the hatches and everything will be okay in another quarter or another 6 months. Endure, okay, it's going to take a long time, but we're coming back to normal. Let's just get really lean and hold out, but our business model is going to come back. There's the pivot. Things are going to change really quickly. The new normal is going to hit us really soon, and the reinvent, which is going to take a long time. And we have time, to your point, Mike, we have time to do the innovation, to reinvent ourselves.
Yeah, that's wonderful. In fact, it's very much in keeping, Kaijan, with a comment that Jane has just put into the chat box, which I think is entirely in alignment with what you've just said. Jane, did you want to say what you said, or are you happy for me to read it out?
No, I mean, my comment sort of was, I think and I'm seeing it everywhere, we're all going, oh, you know, in this post-COVID state, and we're, you know, what our new normal is. And I guess I'm a little concerned because I don't think we are anywhere near post-COVID. I think we've got quite a bumpy ride ahead still with recessions. We're going to see even more unemployment. We are going to see more companies go down. Some really big changes. The longer airlines and tourism are out. I think there's still a lot more change to come, and I think those changes are going to have a big impact on housing and community. And so I'm hesitating with my teams to talk about the norm at all, because I think once we start to talk about norm, we start to get comfortable. And I don't want my teams getting comfortable just quite yet, because I think we've got more to come. And so I don't want to lose our openness to that innovation by really trying to kind of hunker us all down now.
Yes.
I want us
Yes.
to keep really agile, because that's where they'll have the resilience to cope with these next few changes, rather than putting them back into a settled state of normal and then shifting them out of it again. So I'm trying to build a really alert, aware, agile resilience in my teams by saying, you know, this ain't over yet. So tomorrow we might have to do this differently, but for today, this is looking good.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Jane, probably a few weeks ago, I wrote a blog around the fact that there is no new normal. Let's just
Yes.
get rid of the term new normal, because new normal implies that, oh, we fixed it now, we've come through that, and now we're settled. Whereas we should be using, I think I'm using the term the next normal, because it's just going to be the next iteration of what we will be doing, and then there'll be a next one after that, and a next one, and a next one. So there's no point can we go, oh well, this is the new normal, because as you've just said, it implies a settled state, and we ain't ever going to see that again. It's just the next stepping stone to whatever happens to be the state after that. Thank you. And Lucinda, you had one final comment, and then we'll wrap up because we're just a little bit over time. Let me just unmute you, Lucinda, if you're still with us. And did you want to just make your comment about, you know, this continuous need for innovation?
Oh, what I was going to say, Kaijan, thank you, is look, you know, innovation, we keep talking about innovation, but surely innovation in the past is different from innovation of the future. And you can't, I think Jane's exactly where I was sort of thinking too, is that I do a lot of quick reading, and I see a lot of companies around the world, and they're all innovating, like looking at Atlassian and all these sorts of things. And that, is there a new way of innovation, a new way of thinking that even entrepreneurs need to be aware of as well?
As you said, let's innovate innovation. Okay.
Yeah,
Over to you.
let's up the ante.
So final comment from you, Kaijan, before we start wrapping up.
Yeah, well, I wanted to share this. So with your two QR codes here, the one on the right, you can just point your phone at it, and it will give you a Dropbox that has the presentation and a workbook. And then the one on the left is the link to the online course that I created. It costs $99, but if you use this code MAXIS2020, you get 100% off. So you get a free access to that. And it basically goes through the book with videos and these slides, and goes through it. And I'll end on that page, but I just want to make one last kind of point, is that I think that COVID has been accelerating us along a path that we've been underway for a long time, which is the recognition that our organizations are still run like centrally planned economies, where a central authority decides where resources go, who does what jobs, and you know, and who gets to eat. And that starts breaking down when the pace of change accelerates. And I use a wave here because the wave crashes at the point where the top of the wave starts moving faster than the bottom of the wave. And I think we are experiencing this crash. And it's why we have such interesting companies that, you know, exploring really interesting things. You might be familiar with the Hire case, where they broke the whole hierarchy down into 4,000 independent micro enterprises, each with their own CEO. And then they said, we're also going to make the functional groups independent. So like the head of IT has to sell IT into these other companies. And if the head of IT can't get their internal companies to buy from them, then, basically they get defunded just by market. So if we put those innovate steps together, what we see is that we're moving from viewing people as employees to entrepreneurs. We're moving from need, we're moving from complex plans to simple statements of purpose, so everyone understands what the company needs. That options aren't going to come from boardrooms, but they're going to come from hallways. Value blockers, companies are not going to have one business model, but rather have an ecosystem of business models. We're going to stop asking people for business plans and allowing them the freedom to experiment. Team, we're going to move from hierarchies to sets of agile teams. And ultimately, in terms of environment, I think we're going to move from thinking of companies as a centrally planned economy to a flat platform where people are free to innovate, find opportunities, rally the resources to pursue those opportunities. And it's you guys that are doing the work to get us there. So that's where I'll end up.
Kaijan, I think all of us will agree that we can absolutely see why you've been rated by Thinkers 50 Radar Group as among the top 30 management thinkers, among the top 8 most influential innovation thought leaders, and #1 in global strategy with your thought leadership in that space, because what you've shared with us today has been so well, I was going to say meaty, but just so full of value. And it's wonderful to hear someone of your stature just really validating the whole role of intrapreneurialism as this global movement takes hold within every country. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's an honor to be with you. And thank you for the work that you all do.
And above and beyond your time today, you've even shared all of these wonderful resources with us. So I will make sure that everyone gets this page, because some people aren't in a position to be able to take the QR code from the screen right now. So thank you, everyone. You'll be hearing from me soon about next month's members masterclass. But right now, Kaijan, we are deeply indebted to you. Very much appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.